This is WMNF Tampa. Stay tuned for a pre-recorded True Talk show.
Welcome to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Ahmed and Samar. On today's program, we're continuing our coverage of the war on Gaza, the genocide that's happening there and its impact on the U.S. election. Also, the what we consider, or our show, the biased media coverage, the mainstream media providing cover for what's happening in Israel. They're not reporting the whole story. Why are they doing that? Is it deliberate? It's definitely different than what's being reported in the Middle East. We're going to have an expert in media and media coverage. Dr. Professor Mohammed Al-Masri will be on with us live from that part of the world. That and more when we come back. This is True Talk on WMNF 88.5.
شبابي وينك الو يا الغالي وين الو سلم لي عالحبيبة عايش بالناس غريبة مش عارف وكري وين الو يا عمري وينك الو يا شبابي وينك الو يا الغالي وين الو سلم لي عالحبيبة عايش بالناس غريبة مش عارف وكري وين قالوا يا حبيبتي نعرف اللي طالت غيبتي الأيام ضحكوا على شيبتي وشيبة ولا تشيبة ما حبوا طيبتي ناس تستنى في خيبتي والأرنبة طلعت ذيبتي وشوفنا منهم خيبة قالوا يا الغالية شلز شباب على إيطاليا لبحر وامواج والعالية وغرقين وحمام وجارية غاطي يميني وشمالية وفكري كان في المالية الوحش كبر يا الأخوات الو يا عمري وينك الو يا شبابي وينك الو يا الغالي وين الو سلم لي عالحبيبة عايش بالناس غريبة مش عارف وكري وين
Welcome back to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Ahmed and Samar. That's Hello by a Balti, Tunisian rapper. And this is True Talk. We're live Thursday, October 24th. We're just less than 2 weeks away from the election. And a lot's been happening. There's a lot of focus, of course, on the swing states. And the war in Gaza is playing a critical role, especially in states like Michigan and Georgia and other places where people are dissatisfied with what both parties are saying and doing about the war in Gaza in support for Israel. Samar, I happen to think that this election, in a way, not for everyone, but because, of course, not all Americans are focused on the issue. Most Americans are focused on being able to survive, provide for their families, have better jobs and better standard of living. But for many people, the war on Gaza will be one of the issues that they'll be voting on, to decide on who to vote for. So in a way, it's kind of a referendum on the handling of this war, especially for the Democrats, especially in Michigan, where there's a large number of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans who are definitely dissatisfied and in many ways angry with the current administration handling of what's happening there. They see it that the U.S. is actually complicit in funding this genocide.
I have to agree with you, Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum, and hello to all our listeners and supporters. But I have to agree with you. And I think one indication of what you're saying is correct is 2 days ago, I think, one journalist asked Kamala, do you think your stand on the Gaza war will cost you the election? Something to that effect. So it is starting to come into the mainstream media to be one of the questions that is being asked about the price of standing with genocide. So not only Ahmed, Arab Americans or Muslim Americans or us only who are in a way very attached to that part of the world, but you also have young American Jews and young Americans who are demonstrating in the universities who are not connected through blood or through family or through anything to that part of the region, and they are extremely supportive of the Palestinian cause and are against the genocide and against what Israel is doing. So it's not like we are just a little tiny itsy-bitsy minority, but you do have maybe a larger coalition of many different groups who are against what is going on. And I think what Abed said last week when we interviewed Mr. Abed of ADC, he said it might be a little bit strange to say, but there are people on the right in the Republican Party who are against, not necessarily because of their love for Palestine or they are against the genocide in Gaza, but they are adamant at giving all this money to Israel. So they are not supportive of Israel. You do have a lot of little clusters of people that when spiders unite, they can suffocate a lion. And that's
that's a nice... I guess analogy of what could happen. I don't know who the lion is. Is that an Arab proverb?
No. It's I think Ethiopian proverb.
Oh, okay. When the spiders unite, they can suffocate a lion. So you mentioned that Kamala Harris is being asked, especially in Michigan, about her support for Gaza and how she plans to end the war. There was a CNN town hall meeting where she was asked that very question. I actually have it here. I want to play that right now.
Decision in part because of the conflict in the Middle East. Annalise?
Thank you, and good evening, Madam Vice President.
Good evening.
My question is, as President, what would you do to ensure not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars?
So I will say, and I think this is to your point, far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. It's unconscionable. And we are now at a place where with Sinwar's death, I do believe we have an opportunity to end this war, bring the hostages home, bring relief to the Palestinian people, and work toward a two-state solution where Israel and the Palestinians in equal measure have security, where the Palestinian people have dignity, self-determination, and the safety that they so rightly deserve.
What do you say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate or staying on the couch, not voting at all because of this issue?
Listen, I am not going to deny the strong feelings that people have. I don't know that anyone who has seen the images who would not have strong feelings about what has happened, much less those who have relatives who have died and been killed. And I know people and I've talked with people. So I appreciate that. But I also do know that for many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries. They also care about our democracy and not having a president of the United States who admires dictators and is a fascist. They also care about the fact that we need practical, common-sense solutions from a leader who is willing to work across the aisle on behalf of the American people and not themselves. They want a president who cares about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body. Understanding that we're not trying to change anyone's belief, but let's not have the government telling women what to do with their body.
So, Samar, basically, I just played that clip. I don't know if you actually heard it, but this is Kamala Harris responding.
I heard it before, but I didn't even understand what she answered.
Yes, basically, well, there was two parts to this question. One, the voter who's still undecided but leans towards her is saying, what are you going to do to make sure that not another Palestinian dies? I mean, obviously, they're not just dying; they're being killed, but dies because of U.S. Providing bombs or funding bombs for Israel to do so. And she tries to say, well, what's happening there in the images is really bad. But with the death of Yahya Sinwar, which actually happened a year into this genocide, so before that it was justified, but now she's saying that the killing of Yahya Sinwar, who was the leader of Hamas, that provides an opening for now that there may be a ceasefire and that there would be a future two-state solution. Obviously, I mean, if you're listening to what the Israelis are saying, what Netanyahu and his government are saying, they don't want a two-state solution. They're saying there's no two-state solution, and they don't want Palestinians to have their own state or Palestine to ever exist. In fact, they're trying to get rid of everyone in the North Gaza and eventually take all of Gaza. So I don't know if she actually is just saying these talking points, or does she actually believe them? For many people, it doesn't come across authentic, or maybe she just doesn't have any choice. I mean, but many people are asking this question, Kamala is willing to risk losing this election because a lot hinges on Michigan. And right now she's actually either tied or behind in Michigan. And in all scenarios, except maybe one or two, for her path to win, she needs Michigan. She needs to win that state. So she's willing to risk all of that instead of just simply saying, well, maybe, hey, it's time to stop arming Israel while this genocide is happening. It's really crazy and it's mind-boggling. But the second part of that, when Anderson Cooper says, what do you say to people that are considering voting third party or just sitting home and not voting? And she comes back and says, well, these, the images coming out of there, it's really horrible. But let's not forget that Trump, we're up against Trump and people still have to buy groceries. And so it's almost like kind of equating genocide with, people have to do things here as well. And that's important to them. So what are the priorities? And of course, saying that somehow Trump is going to be this, huge dictator boogeyman, which there's no denying Trump is not a great guy. But every time the genocide issue comes up in Gaza, they pivot back to, well, hey, what about Trump? And Trump is going to be even worse, et cetera, et cetera. But Samar, I wanted to tell you that our guest is with us now. Dr. Mohammed Al-Masri is joining us live from Doha, Qatar, where he's a professor. Welcome to True Talk, Dr. Mohammed Al-Masri, if it's okay to use that.
I think he needs to unmute his mic.
Yeah, he's working on it. So, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, good to talk to you guys again. Sorry about that.
Mohammed, is it okay to call you Mohammed, or do we have to call you doctor every time?
No. If you call me doctor, it makes me feel like I'm at work.
Oh, okay. So you're a professor in the Media Studies program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. You're an American citizen, Arab American, Egyptian American, and you focus on media studies. We saw your recent op-ed in Al Jazeera that titled "Leaked U.S. Warning to Israel to, quote, let aid in Gaza, end quote, is merely a distraction." And because we heard about this about a week to 10 days ago, that the Biden administration sent a letter signed by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, sending a letter to the Israeli government warning them that they need to let more aid in or risk being in violation of U.S. law, and that, it may impact, being able to provide them with further weapons. But they gave him a 30-day deadline, which is conveniently after the election. So why did you write this article, and, why are you skeptical about the letter?
Well, this warning that the U.S. delivered to Israel just didn't make a lot of sense. It just didn't square up with me. It's kind of absurd on its face, because here's the U.S. coming along 12 and a half months into a genocide and into this Israeli forced starvation policy, which is well documented. It's very public. The Israeli leaders have told us what they're doing. First, they told us what they were planning to do, and then as they were doing it, or as they've been doing it, they've been kind of walking us through it. And they've showed us indeed in their actions what they've been doing. It's documented by every single human rights group, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, even Israeli human rights groups. So obviously the U.S. knows all of this. And so for them to come along 12 and a half months into this and finally say, we don't like that you're starving the Palestinians, we might do something about it, that just was odd. That was odd to me. The other reason it was odd, or that it struck me as odd, is because as bad as forced starvation is, and it's a very serious war crime, it's inhumane, Israel's actually doing much worse than that. They are indiscriminately bombing civilians and at times targeting civilians. And we know that because Israel has told us as much. And if our media published news reports critically the way that the Israeli media do, the American public would actually be a lot better informed. In the Israeli media, they do publish about Israel's 100-to-1 ratio, which is a policy, a military doctrine that Israel has been enacting in Gaza. It says that if they get intelligence, usually shoddy intelligence based off of AI, artificial intelligence, but if they get some intelligence that there's a Hamas person in an area, they will bomb it, even if they think that it will, if they calculate that it's going to kill 100 civilians. They will still carry out the attack. That's called the 100-to-1 ratio. And this is published in Israeli media. They also have been enacting the Dahiyya doctrine in Gaza. This is also well known, very, very well documented in Israeli media. The Dahiyya doctrine is a military policy that seeks maximum damage to civilian areas to punish the civilians. And there are other doctrines. And my point is that the U.S. knows about all of this, and yet they're willing to continue to send massive weaponry to Israel, including these 2,000-pound bombs, which Israel uses to devastate neighborhoods, right? They dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on a residential neighborhood in Jabalia and killed a couple hundred Palestinians in one go. And they admitted that they were only going after one Hamas commander. This was last December. And right? The U.S. knows about all this.
Right.
So the U.S. is saying, effectively what they're saying is you can bomb indiscriminately and you can even target civilians, but we don't want you to starve the Palestinians anymore 12 and a half months into this. So it didn't square up, and I wrote the article in an effort to kind of try to explain what I really think was going on, and people can read it if they want, but my argument is that this is more about the election than anything else.
Right. Your article, which is in Al Jazeera's titled, like I said, Leaked U.S. Warning to Israel to Let Aid into Gaza is Merely a Distraction. You mentioned a 100-to-1 ratio, meaning for, to catch one guy, they're willing to eliminate one Hamas person, supposedly. They could kill up to 100, possibly more. And they're using AI, this AI machine called Lavender program to do so. But wouldn't you agree that the killing of Sinwar actually contradicts that, because one of the reasons they're saying that they have to use these 2,000-pound bombs is that these Hamas leaders, including Sinwar, are hiding in bunkers deep underground. In order to reach them, they have to use these massive weapons that penetrate the earth and go deep into these bunkers. But when they killed Sinwar, he was not in a residential area. He was in an area where civilians are not located, and he was above ground. And they broadcast the images afterwards to prove that. So it kind of contradicts. They didn't need to use those heavy weaponry that are devastating towns, and that they've been using to destroy hospitals and schools all over Gaza, which I think you've pointed out in the past that really the true intention is to make Gaza unlivable, inhabitable, so people can never return back to their homes. So did you notice that contradiction, especially with the killing of Sinwar?
I do, and it's something that I think it's a good point. It's something that many observers, analysts, scholars have noted, and not just in the case of Sinwar, but if you look at the way that Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated, targeted assassination in Iran. Israel doesn't necessarily have to, destroy neighborhoods in order to kill single people. They've proven it actually time and time again with some of these targeted assassinations. And now the other point is, you mentioned Lavender. They have a program called Where's Daddy?
What is it called?
It's called Where's Daddy?
Where is Daddy? Okay.
Yeah, that's what the Israelis call it. And so they have a pretty good beat on these. They have very good, very advanced intelligence, and so they oftentimes have a good beat on where these commanders may be. And in the Where's Daddy program, basically they wait for the target, the fighter, to come home. And late at night, they will target the entire residential complex and obviously kill, many people. It's one of the reasons why some of the scholars who have been following this closely say it's one of the reasons why so many entire families have been eliminated. I don't have the number in front of me right now, but it's actually an astounding number of entire families.
Yeah, I think it's like they said 900 or something, that entire families have been, meaning when entire families, that means there are no, grandchildren are even being killed, and no one to carry the family name forward, just wiping them off. And this is something unheard of, because the nature, especially in Gaza, families live together. So if somebody, it's not just it's not just the immediate family, parents and children, wife and children. It's the grandparents, it's the uncles, it's the cousins. They all live basically in the same building because of nature. Maybe it's a multi-story building and each family is on a different floor because of the limited space. So when they target one building, residential building, you're actually, taking on an entire family or tribe even. But so if the U.S. government knows all this, and of course they share intelligence back and forth, why, and Samar, I'm going to get you next. I know you have some questions. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to go, but so why are they continuing to give this lip service that they want a two-state solution, even though they know that the Israelis don't want a two-state solution? And many in Washington already kind of realize, most in Washington, that the two-state solution is dead. It's not possible. Why do you think that we keep hearing the same, talking points over and over, that somehow that this is a possibility and that they want a ceasefire, even though they've been, kind of gave up on pushing for a ceasefire?
Yeah, well, I think it's as simple as the U.S. Needing to maintain just a kind of a decorum and a public image, right? There's a lot of this is for public consumption. They can't come out and say Israel's committing genocide, but yet we're still gonna support them, militarily. They can't, even though I'm sure they know that it's obviously a textbook case of genocide. There isn't any difference of opinion among any scholar of genocide and Holocaust studies or international humanitarian law. The U.S. government and the State Department, they're not stupid, so they know this, but they can't say it. They can't come out and say, to your point, that the two-state solution has been rendered impossible by Israel, right? I mean, they can't come out and say that. Israel is their closest ally. So they pay lip service to these ideas. I mean, the ceasefire thing, you mentioned the ceasefire, it's absurd. It's been a big charade. I mean, the U.S. has been saying that they want a ceasefire, and then when a ceasefire proposal comes across the desk at the United Nations Security Council, the U.S. vetoes it. This happened last October, 2023. Then it happened again in December. Then it happened again in March, 3 straight times. And in every single case, the U.S. was the only country out of the 15, to veto or to vote no on the ceasefire. And on the first one, I thought it was really telling. Back in October of 2023, the U.S. was opposed to even using the word ceasefire. They watered it down so much that it ended up just talking about humanitarian pauses.
Right, I remember that.
And even that was too much for the U.S. and they vetoed it. So, I mean, it's talking out of both sides of the mouth, so to speak. And obviously we talked about talking about a ceasefire, but then continuing to supply Israel with the weaponry that they need to carry out these war crimes.
Samar?
I want to jump in here, Dr. Muhammad, although I had originally a different question, but along this line, in the Arab world, they keep telling me Netanyahu controls the White House, controls Biden, AIPAC, and the Israeli lobby is so strong that they are dictating on the U.S. foreign policy. I beg to differ. What do you think, Dr. Al-Masri? Is the U.S. doing the U.S. support for Israel is part of U.S. global power-grabbing, strategic positioning of Israel? I mean, I do not believe that really Netanyahu is in control of our U.S. foreign policy or the Israeli lobby is in control. Do you agree with me?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So there's a difference of opinion among the scholars and the experts. So you have a school of thought that is led by people like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein, who believe that it is fundamentally part of U.S. Foreign policy, a part of the U.S. strategic vision to support Israel. In other words, that it's in the U.S.'s best interest to support Israel unconditionally, right? So in other words, the U.S. supports Israel for the U.S. or for U.S. interests. That's one school of thought. There's another school of thought led by people like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, who wrote the book on the Israel lobby in 2007, who believe that the reason why the U.S. tends to support Israel unconditionally is because of the Israel lobby, which is incredibly powerful in the United States. I think it's possible that there's truth in both camps or in both schools of thought. I think the Israel lobby is incredibly powerful. I think it puts U.S. politicians at an individual level in very, very difficult spots if they want to continue on in office and win elections. And I do think that clearly the U.S. has married itself to Israel. And so for better or worse, the U.S. is going to support their ally in the Middle East. So I think there's probably truth to both arguments. But what I will say, even Noam Chomsky acknowledged as late as 2023, right, before kind of falling ill, that there was a shift taking place in American politics. He said that historically it has been the case that the U.S. can pretty much exert pressure on Israel whenever it wants. And there are many examples of this. One example that I was reminded of recently is 1982, when Israel carried out the Sabra and Shatila massacre in Lebanon. They killed about 3,000 people in about 36 hours. Ronald Reagan picked up the phone and told Menachem Begin, the then prime minister of Israel. He said, you have to stop this Holocaust immediately. And he used the word Holocaust in this phone call, reportedly. This is documented in books and in news reports. And immediately the Israelis stopped. And there are many other examples. Chomsky, though, in this interview in 2023 said that there's a shift taking place. And the shift is basically that Israel is now essentially starting to push the United States around and back the United States into corners. And I think we've seen that in Gaza, Samar. You know, think back a few months to a few months ago. The U.S. was actually dead against an invasion of Rafah. And they said so on numerous occasions via the president, via the Secretary of Defense, via the Secretary of State. They said it would be catastrophic. They said it would be a red line for them. And what ended up happening is that Israel just pushed the United States into a corner and forced the United States to adjust its position. It just basically said, listen, we're going to do this no matter what you say. And the U.S. had to change course. And the U.S. finally said, well, we're not necessarily opposed to an invasion of Rafah. We just want it to be handled with care. Right. And the same thing happened with regards to humanitarian aid. The U.S. tried to pressure Israel, was unable to do so. They were not willing. Israel was not willing to open up any land crossings to allow humanitarian aid in. And the U.S., quite embarrassingly, I might say, as an American, was forced to spend $360 million to build a makeshift pier off the coast of Gaza, which was destined to fail from the start. And sure enough, as every expert predicted, it failed. And it was they had to tear it down within about 45 days or so. So and it was useless to begin with. But I mean, then there are other examples from Gaza. So I do think we're in the process of this shift that's taking place, or that has already taken place.
Even if it jeopardizes monarchies and systems that we support. And I want to give the example of Jordan, because
when you say we, can you just clarify for our listeners who you mean by we?
Me.
No, you don't support tyrants. You mean the United States government? Okay.
Sorry, I got distracted for a second here.
Yeah, say that again. Yeah, but sometimes our listeners, because they're like, oh, Samar supports dictators and in the Middle East.
Oh okay, I guess I'm getting some senior moment here. But Dr. El-Masri, for instance, I want to give the example of Jordan. They are calling for 1 million march tomorrow, and they say, we're not going to be silent. It's over. Israel crossed every red line for us. And a few days ago, 2 young Jordanians left their wives and their kids and went to the border and killed a couple of soldiers and did fidai kind of guerrilla warfare. They are young people. They're not part of any organization. They're not part of any Islamic movement. They're not part of any resistance. They just said, we could not take it anymore. I mean, Jordan and Israel have the longest border. It is very difficult to maintain this border and the security of this border. So the U.S. is willing to jeopardize an uprising in Jordan. I know it's very little chances of it happening in Egypt, but things can go out of hand very quickly. The images that the Americans cannot see on our mainstream media, but they can see it on Twitter and Instagram. I have Americans who send me messages and say, how can the heart take more than this? I mean, these are Americans that have zero connection to that part of the world and are angry, are very, very angry.
Yeah. No, I understand your question. And the short answer to your question is that, yes, the U.S., on behalf of Israel, is prepared to sacrifice its own interests, in my opinion and in my estimation. And you documented some of it. But think about the fact that during this Israeli genocide, on behalf of Israel and defending Israel, the U.S. has lost several service people, right? On behalf of Israel. The U.S. has had to spend tens of billions of taxpayer dollars that could very easily be put to much better use in the United States. The U.S. has seen its global standing decline dramatically. Public opinion of the United States is down almost everywhere in the world. The U.S. is being caught up now in a genocide case. It's going to be seen when the dust settles as having been complicit in genocide. The U.S. is now risking a large-scale regional war. We are on the precipice of a large regional war that will drag the U.S. in and will compromise U.S. Assets in the region. And I could go on. I just listed, 4 or 5 different ways in which the U.S. has harmed itself. But yes, the U.S. is willing to do that. And you all remember when we had conversations a decade ago about the U.S.'s Egypt policy. And one of the arguments that we were trying to make at that time was that the U.S. was acting in a way that harmed its own interests by propping up the Sisi dictatorship in Egypt and propping up a military coup, not even being willing to follow U.S. law. And we're seeing the same thing play out again. The U.S. is contravening its own laws, to say nothing of international law, but even U.S. law. The Leahy law prohibits the United States from supporting Israel in the way that it is supporting Israel right now. And it's in some ways unimaginable, but in other ways, I think we all could have predicted it, because this is U.S. foreign policy.
Let me just remind our listeners, they are listening to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM. My co-host Ahmed Bedier and myself, Samar Jarrah, are talking to Professor Mohammed Al-Masri. He is a professor in Media Studies program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies in Qatar. Dr. Al-Masri, Israel bombed and destroyed universities. They are attacking hospitals. In the north, they just assassinated 2 doctors. One's name is Muhammad Ghannam, a young doctor. I am in contact with another surgeon, and he sent me a message yesterday that all of these doctors are getting messages to evacuate, or they're going to be targeted, because Muhammad Ghannam was targeted by a drone while he was walking to the hospital. And there is another physician that was killed yesterday, but I can't remember his name. Now, we, Samar, when I read these things, I say, this is systematic. This has to be part of a plan. And then in your wonderful article, and let me remind our listeners, the title is Leaked U.S. Warning to Israel to Let Aid in Gaza is Merely a Distraction. It was published on October 17, and you can find it on aljazeera.net. You talk about something called the General's Plan. Could you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the General's Plan was put together by a top Israeli security official. Technically, he's a former Israeli security official, but he's still an advisor to Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. His name is Jarrah Island. And effectively, his plan is to give Gazans in North Gaza the choice of either starving to death or moving, basically being ethnically cleansed, to being driven from their homes. It's basically an ethnic cleansing policy. What surprises me is not this particular policy, but is that the U.S. hasn't been reacting to similar policies that have been ongoing since the start of the war. I mean, in the very early hours after October 7th, after the attack on Israel, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, came out and said that he was enacting a complete siege on Gaza. And he said there will be no fuel, no food, no water, and no medicine. And he's using those exact words. So he was calling at that time for a starvation policy. And then the Israelis went out and implemented that policy. Giora Island, at the same time, this is now a year ago, he said even that was not enough. He said that the Israelis would have to make sure that they also targeted the people who would try inevitably to deliver aid to the Palestinians. He was talking about aid organizations. And we should remind everyone that more than 200 UN staff have been killed during this genocide, right? This is a world record. This conflict is now a world record for killed UN staff. It's also a world record for killed journalists. This is all policy. This is Israeli military doctrine. Moshe Dayan said decades ago that Israel must be seen in its foreign policy to be a mad dog. And those are his words, right? This is the former Israeli defense minister and foreign minister. He's saying Israel must be seen by its enemies as a mad dog. Ariel Sharon delivered a similar statement. So when Gallant comes out after October 7th and says what he says, and then when he says in another interview or a different press conference, when he says, we will eliminate everything. And when the president comes out, Isaac Herzog, and says, there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. He said all this talk about civilians is untrue. He said it's an entire population that we are at war with. People can look these quotes up. This is why when South Africa went to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, in January, they presented this 584-page report. There were something like 20 or 25 pages just on genocidal statements. There are dozens and dozens of genocidal statements from top Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the President Isaac Herzog, and many others. So to your point, Samar, this is policy. It's not just the general's plan. The general's plan comes a year into the war out of basically frustration, because Israel was trying very hard in the early days to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. They called upon Egypt, and things actually became very tense with Egypt in last October because Egypt refused to take the Gazans in. They refused to open their border, but that's what Israel was calling for. They also called the Jordanians, why don't you open your borders to the Gazans? They called the European Union, why won't you take these people in as refugees in the same way that you took in, the Syrians, right? This is what Israel was working towards, ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip. And this is long-standing policy. This is the Greater Israel policy. All of this land is supposed to be for Israel, right? It's not just the West Bank and Gaza even. I mean, Greater Israel, if you look at the biblical interpretations and if you get into the Zionist literature and the Israeli policy, I mean, and they say this openly, none of this is conspiratorial in the least, right? This is all published, it's all documented. They have conferences about this. They just had a conference this week about Greater Israel, about resettling in Gaza. But Greater Israel goes into Jordan, swaths of Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, right? So the biblical interpretation of Israel is that it's a vast land that extends beyond, from the river to the sea. And this is a plan that has been enacted for decades. It's one of the reasons why Israel expands settlements so aggressively in the West Bank. The intention, of course, is to take all of the land eventually. I mean, they're already up to more than 700 settlements. More than 200 settlements and 700,000 settlers in the West Bank and Jerusalem.
Right.
All of them illegal.
And the West Bank is supposed to be the future Palestinian state. Now it's been since 1948. They're promising a Palestinian state. They keep saying we want a two-state solution. And they keep saying, the Palestinians are refusing to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. Well, Israel already exists.
Which is nonsense.
The Palestinian land and state does not exist. And according to Zionism, from over 100 years ago, from the founders, they never intended that a Palestine will exist in the future. they were clear in their writings, which are available to find and to research, that they plan to replace the indigenous Palestinian people with, European Jewish people. In a way, some people, at the beginning, they even European Jews rejected the idea because they thought it was a type of anti-Semitic plan to relocate all these European Jews and put them somewhere into a land that they don't recognize and they're not part of, and they don't have any claim to. But this was a Zionist plan that, was founded by Theodore Herzl and the others that bought into it, of relocating hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jewish people from Europe because of the hostilities they face in Europe and in Germany and in Eastern Europe, and to move them and relocate them to the Middle East, to Palestine, to replace the Arab population there and establish the state of Israel. But they never intended and they never wanted a two-state solution side by side. It seems like, and it's obvious now, that was just lip service so they can just do this type of slow ethnic cleansing. Instead of just killing everybody off at once, and they weren't able to do that, it's like, every year they take more and more land. And right now, in the past year, they're trying to attempt to take back or take Gaza and eliminate or relocate or push out or depopulate the population of Gaza, the Palestinians there. And it's so obvious to the world. Whoever doesn't recognize that this is a genocide is just not paying attention or just lying. You can't be in the United States government and not see what's happening there and say, well, it's not a genocide, that this started on October 7th. And let's not forget what happened on October 7th. Way before October 7th, there are so many other massacres that continued to happen. And I think, this whole concept of what you were saying there, 100-to-1 policy for every one person, I think it also extends that for every time a Israeli is killed or injured, that 100 Palestinians would have to be killed for every one. And even though the death toll officially is like 45,000 right now, I think, there are other reports that suggest it's actually well over 200,000 if you calculate, because it's been like around 40,000 for the past 7 months. It hasn't really moved much because the health ministry in Gaza has kind of stopped functioning because, they decimated all these hospitals. But there are tens of thousands of people under the rubble that they can't, get out. And it's just so disheartening to see that and expect somehow that there'll be peace after this. Okay, you just killed hundreds of thousands of people, massacring them, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and then you expect them to embrace. And I don't know if you can comment to this, but in Israeli media on a regular basis, they justify the killing of even children, Palestinian children in Gaza, to say, well, because those Palestinian children, even though they're children now, they're going to grow up to be our enemies later, so we might as well eliminate them now before they turn into our enemies later, because how can they even make peace with us after what has happened to their parents? Mm-hmm. So
Ahmed,
it just, Go ahead, Samar.
Sorry. Yeah, I wanted, because we are running out of time and Professor Al-Masri is a media expert, and I wanted to ask you about our media coverage or lack of coverage. And aren't they, because there was an interview with a lawyer, and he said, according to international law, when media encourage genocide or do not cover genocide, they might be held liable according to international law. But what do you think of our media coverage of this conflict? And would it have been wouldn't have done a difference to the public opinion if Americans saw 18 years old on an IV being burned alive on camera because of bombing a tent? Wouldn't this change public opinion and the support for war?
Yeah, so just really quickly on the two-state solution, Benjamin Netanyahu had been bragging in recent months about how he worked systematically to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, to render the two-state solution impossible. And just for the record, this idea of recognizing Israel is probably one of the most absurd narratives, right? I mean, we never would have went to the Native Americans while they were being genocidally killed and said, hey, do you recognize the white man, or
right
do you
to
recognize
exist.
the right of the white man to exist on this land? I mean, the white man existed, right? It should be the other way around. You should ask the white settlers to recognize the Native Americans, and that's how it should be in this case too. Should do the Israelis recognize the Palestinians' right to exist and the right to a state? But for the record, everyone in the Palestinian political circle has acknowledged Israel's right to exist and accepted this two-state solution. In the individual Hamas leaders, forget about the Palestinian Authority. Of course, they're on board, but even Hamas, they're on board with the two-state solution. All of their individual leaders had individual statements to the media accepting a Palestinian state on the June 1967 borders. And then Hamas also released a charter, an updated charter, which abrogated their previous charter. This was in 2017, and they say the same thing. This is official political document. They say we accept a Palestinian state on the June 1967 borders, which is de facto recognition of the state of Israel on its June 1967 borders, which, by the way, is 78% of the land. Now,
meaning Israel would get 78% of the land. Palestinians will get only 22% of the land, and even Hamas had accepted that to go back to the 1967 border.
Yes, and Israel at every peace negotiation basically rejected that. Right. I mean, we don't have time to go into every, Camp David and Tauba and Madrid and all these different negotiations. But if there were time, maybe we could. Now, on the media, I think I actually just finished a study on this that's going to be published in Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, looking at CNN, MSNBC, and some other broadcast outlets. And there have been a few other studies done. Basically, the long and the short of it is this. There's an overwhelming reliance in American media and other Western media on Israeli sources and almost a complete neglect of Palestinian sources. That's number one. Number two, Israeli violence is almost always framed up as self-defense. Palestinian violence is almost always framed up as aggression, no matter what it is, right? Another important finding is that Israeli victims are humanized. They are personalized. American media reports and other Western reports will give us the names of Israeli victims, their ages, their occupations, their hobbies. They'll talk about their family relations. They don't do the same for Palestinians. All of these studies that I'm referring to right now, including my own, are quantitative studies, meaning they present quantitative empirical data, right? They present statistics, they present numbers. And so I think the coverage has been overwhelmingly one-sided, and I can't speak too much to the issues of international law. What Craig McIver, he's the former a top UN official who resigned in October of 2023, shortly after the genocide started, what he's been arguing, he wrote an article a few weeks back, is that based on the Genocide Convention, individuals, not just states, but individuals, private members of society have an obligation to prevent genocide if they are able to do so. And no one can be complicit in genocide. And he's made the argument that American media outlets and other Western media outlets are complicit because they've been effectively covering up for Israel through all of this just shoddy, imbalanced reporting.
And they could be held liable because they're providing this type of cover, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to carry out this genocide.
And Mark Regev is on trial now in.
Mark Regev is the former spokesperson for Netanyahu and part of the government there, and now he's on trial in Australia, where he's also a citizen, Australian Israeli. We're out of time. We'd love to have you back on to continue this conversation. Mohammed Al-Masri, this is WMNF Tampa. See us here. If you try to call in or have a comment, please email it to us right now, to truetalk@wmnf.org, truetalk@wmnf.org, and we'll try to maybe get to it at the next show, which will be a week from now, Thursday, 12 o'clock. The Scoop is next. Have a great weekend, everyone, and let's keep praying for peace for the Palestinians and for people and for the genocide to end. And there's so much we didn't get to today, but hopefully we can get to it next week. Thanks again,